Let's go back to our top story and the story of GDP. I'm joined by Lullu Krugel, who is the chief economist at PwC. Thanks so much for your time on SABC News. So the South African economy contracting 0.7% in the second quarter. Stats are saying the economy is smaller now than before the pandemic.
The fact of the matter is that it is smaller than it was in the first quarter of this year. And also, if you compare it to last year, the first half, it contracted by 1.4%. So it is slightly smaller in real terms. We had a good recovery run last year, and we also started off the first part of this year fairly good. So we were on track, or the economy was slightly bigger than during the pandemic. But this contraction that we're seeing now, unfortunately, in real terms, mean the value of what we're producing is less than it was in the beginning of 2020.
Lulu, what were the negative contributors to growth in the second quarter?
It was basically across the board, all sectors. That's the scary bit. But manufacturing really one of the key parts of the economy that contracted significantly. Almost across the board, all manufacturing industries that we have in the South African economy has contracted. The mining industry contracted, construction contracted. So all of the key drivers of growth or job creation in the economy were the ones that were really hit hard. And the reason behind that is, if we look at what has happened with the logistics, in particular in KZN during the flooding, that being the movement of goods through the ports, etc., that being stopped to a large extent for quite a few weeks before it could get going. So it negatively impacted on all industries. And then, of course, load shedding. That was the other one that really, if we can look at the manufacturing industry in particular, we can see that hasn't had an impact.
We saw transport and finance both growing 2.4%.
Yeah, finance is an old stalwart, I almost want to say, in the South African economy. If the finance sector also contracts, then it is really not good news. And we traditionally see finance being a fairly good, performer, generally being a steady part of the economy. Transport, that's a bit of good news. However, I want to say that it is an industry that's dependent on a lot of other industries in the economy. So therefore, I would view this the long-term possibility of that sector to continue to grow, with keeping in mind what is happening in other sectors. Finance, however, is not the biggest job creator for especially semi-skilled and unskilled workers. So that's of course it's good news. But that is the challenge that we're sitting with.
When we talk about what's happening now versus pre-pandemic, there's a concern that seems to be raised by Stats SA that only 4 industries were at or above their pre-pandemic levels of productions. They're speaking about finance, real estate and business services and how long those took to recover. Can we look at the data and say all these sectors that saw negative growth are going to take this possible amount of quarters to recover?
The sad thing is, when we started to look into where we were at the downturn, at the really height of the pandemic, we looked at it and we thought it could take up to 3 years for the economy to recover from where we were at that point in time. So that means that only next year we will be in a space where we have fully clawed back what has happened during the pandemic and the downturn that we've seen. I suppose what we didn't bargain on is that what we would see a recovery and then another downturn or another dip in the economy like we've seen in quarter 2. And that is the bad news because we were kind of almost there with a lot of sectors, almost there with in terms of the overall output in the economy. And now we've seen the slip in the second quarter. And that is my concern, that we didn't anticipate that, and that has put us back further. So unfortunately, at the very height of the pandemic, we were thinking 3, even 4 years. So unfortunately, that seems to be the reality of what we're sitting with now.
Okay, what we're also seeing from these figures is that the construction industry is 24% smaller than it was before the pandemic. What, if anything, can we read into that? And also speaking to government's plans to use infrastructure to grow the economy and grow jobs, I'm thinking that's possibly an avenue to do that through.
Yeah, the construction sector is one of the sectors that's been taking a beating even before the pandemic. So, and during the pandemic, a lot of the big projects have been put on hold. We've seen a bit of a revival in, household activities, but in terms of, a lot of us actually spending a bit on our houses, etc. But that's a very, very, very small portion, and the majority of it is driven by government and big infrastructure activity, and that has really been under pressure. The challenge, I think, at the moment, if we look at government, and you rightfully said that they've put infrastructure as one of the key ways in which they can rebuild the economy, is that it's actually been quite slow in terms of rollout. So the plans are there, but where the activity needs to happen in the municipalities on a provincial level, things have been happening slowly and it's been dragging on. And that has put a hamper on the rate at which the construction sector can actually help to rebuild the economy. Again, there's been a bit of a recovery in the first quarter, but now in the second quarter, I think with a lot of the uncertainty of what is happening globally, brakes have been put on a lot of spending decisions.
Lulu, if you were to look forward to the Q3 figures that are going to be coming out, what can we expect more of the same? And then could we be looking at recession and more economic challenges for South Africa?
I think that we sitting on the one hand with some challenges in our own economy plus the global economy. And it is the balance of those two that's hitting us really hard at this point in time. When we were moving out of the pandemic, the rate at which the rest of the global economy was recovering was higher than South Africa, and we were lagging behind. And I think that is the challenge, that the uncertainty that the global economy is under, and the strain that the global economy is under now, is putting the brakes on what we are seeing. The good news, I suppose, is that we did have a very tough second quarter, with everything that the flooding in KZN and the impact of that on the economy, and challenges with logistics, prices, etc. Hopefully that would start to peter out, and we will start to see some increase in activity in the second quarter, in the third quarter. Overall, still for this year, we're expecting very modest growth, so in the region of 1%, but very modest growth expected for the year in total.
Lullu Krugel, the chief economist at PwC, thanks so much for your time and insight on SABC News today, talking to us about that breaking news story this hour, South African economy contracting by 0.7% in the second quarter.